CISA's work really revolved around kind of three key lines of effort. The first being reaching out to our partners in Israel, the Israeli National Cyber Directorate that we work with every day, to make sure that they knew that we were available to provide whatever support that they required, given the challenges that they were facing. To date, they haven't required any, but they know that that line of communication is open. Second, beyond reaching out to our friends in Israel and CERT-IL, we started reaching out to our other international partners around the world to keep track of things that are emerging in cyberspace. Our interagency partners like the FBI and NSA, private industry are parts of our Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, those companies that have the best visibility into the cyber ecosystem. Are they seeing changes in the cyber threat landscape today, either from Iran or Hamas directly, or other folks who are looking to take advantage of the situation? The third, going to the infrastructure security part of CISA, we've started to do outreach to faith-based organizations throughout the United States. In many times, when you have incidents in the Middle East, that tends to cause a heightened threat environment domestically. People try to take advantage of that situation. To date, we haven't seen any attacks against faith-based organizations in the United States, Jewish or otherwise, but we have a long history of working with those organizations to build their security and resilience, and that's what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. I think you said this, but so you have not seen anything of an uptick in cyber activity from Iran or Hamas?
Correct.
On the flip side of that question, had you seen any activity in the weeks leading up to this attack that was out of the ordinary? One of your many responsibilities at CISA was running the Unified Coordination Group, whose responsibility it was to prepare government agencies, private sector partners ahead of potential Russian cyber activity in the aftermath of their invasion of Ukraine. Are there conversations ongoing right now about standing up a similar group in the case of this conflict?
I think in the case of the Russian Unified Coordination Group, we were, based upon the intelligence at the time, really believed that a U.S. support for Ukraine was the type of event that could trigger Russian retaliation against the homeland. And so we really believed that the homeland could become a front in that conflict. And it's why we thought, and why the White House designated DHS the lead federal agency, and we stood up the Unified Coordination Group, it was to answer that challenge. Today, we're not seeing the type of domestic threat that would require that. But as I said, we're doing a lot of that same coordination. We're talking to our interagency partners. We're doing outreach across the country with private industry on cyber threats. So I don't think we need a unified coordination group in the same vein, but there is still a lot of work that we're going to do to make sure that we track changes in the risk environment here on the home front, and that we're ready to surge resources or provide additional public messaging should it be required.
So staying on Russia for a moment, over the course of the past almost 2 years now, what has been the level of activity vis-a-vis the United States from Russian cyber actors? Have you seen spikes or valleys as the conflict has continued? Has it been sort of a steady boil?
I think we have seen periods of spike and spikes, but that is kind of fairly standard when you're looking at tracking cyber intrusion sets online. It tends to not be a straight line across the board. You'll see more activity and then you'll see less. But I think the positive news is that we have not seen any type of attacks targeting the United States, but there's still a lot of activity looking to compromise critical systems. Rob Joyce covered a couple of those this morning during his session. There's obviously a significant amount of activity, Russia targeting Ukraine, that has been kind of consistent throughout the war. Some of that very visible and very public, like the attacks against Viasat and targeting various government networks and private sector networks in Ukraine. A lot of that is not necessarily as visible and public because it's part of joint cyber kinetic attacks that Russian military units have undertaken. And I think as Rob said, the thing that has been most impressive is the Ukrainian ability to withstand those attacks without really compromising critical systems. I think that is in part due to incompetence on the Russian side. A military that was inept in their kinetic attack was just as inept in their kind of cyber war. And second, that the Ukrainians have put in place stronger defenses since 2014, and they have built real systemic resilience in a lot of key parts of their infrastructure, and that has allowed them to withstand fairly constant barrage of Russian activity.
Inept is a strong word. So you're not actually expecting that there is still to come a sort of massive cyber incursion by the Russians at this stage?
I can't predict exactly what Russia will do. They still have a lot of formidable cyber capabilities. They demonstrate those from time to time. I think the type of sophisticated attack we saw with SolarWinds, kind of getting into networks around the world, their ability to disrupt the Viasat satellite network with spillover effects in Europe demonstrate that they have a lot of formidable capabilities, but bringing those to bear to cause specific, very broad disruptive effects sometimes is challenging, and they're not necessarily showing the ability to do it in Ukraine.
Do you think, focusing again on the United States, that the likelihood of a Russian cyber attack related to the conflict is greater now than it was in February of 2021, or lower?
I don't know the answer to that question, in part because the willingness of Russia to target the United States would be potentially seen as a significant escalation. And I don't think anyone has yet cracked the code in deciphering what's going on in the mind of Vladimir Putin and his willingness to escalate the conflict in that way. I would say that in the run-up to the war, we were significantly concerned about potential retaliation against the homeland and what kind of form that could take. But we're not necessarily seeing the same degree of threat today, so I'd probably say lower. But again, we need to be ever vigilant because of the nature of the regime itself and the unpredictability of what they may do.
Let me shift us in the limited time that we have to a topic that we haven't discussed a ton this week, but I'm sure will become increasingly a focal point, and that is election security and CISA's role in it. I know you played an integral part in the 2020 elections, so can you offer us a little bit of a scene setter as we approach rapidly 2024? Where is CISA focused? How are you engaging with states? How would you describe the level of resilience that we've achieved in this moment in election infrastructure today?
Yeah, so obviously this is something that has been a huge focus for the agency, continues to be one of our top priorities, significant amount of work with the election community. And I would say in this area, CISA tries to meet election officials where they are. In the wake of the 2016 election, we spent a lot of time trying to build cybersecurity and resilience of election systems because that was an area that had been, didn't have the level of focus of election officials prior to 2016. And they rose to the occasion thanks to their hard work, support that we provided in other federal agencies, resources provided by Congress. Election systems today are far more resilient and far more secure from cyber threats than they were in 2016. But the threat environment has continued to change. So in the 2022 election, the requests we got most often from state and local officials were not for cybersecurity related services, but it was for physical security support. It was for attempting to deal with threats directly to election officials themselves. So we surged our protective security support, things like active shooter training, physical security assessments of polling places and election security and election offices, and de-escalation training, training that we had actually initially developed to support faith-based organizations in the wake of some of the shooting incidents that they have experienced. We adapted to provide to election offices and election officials and poll workers so that they could de-escalate if individuals came in who were agitated, who may be prone to violence. I would say we need to ensure as we move ahead to 2024 that we are agile in terms of the threat environment that we're dealing with for election officials, and whether it's cybersecurity services, whether it's physical security support, whether it's dealing with the complex information environment that we're in, that we provide the kind of support that's going to get them what they need and give the American people confidence that the election is secure.
Are you seeing those kinds of demands for physical security already ahead of 2024?
Yeah, that's been fairly consistent since 2022, and I think we have strived to have really close relationship. The kind of field-based personnel that CISA has throughout the country, protective security advisors and cybersecurity advisors, are working with election officials throughout the country. What do they need jurisdiction by jurisdiction? What do they need in each state, working with state officials who can push the information down, making sure that they're tied into our information sharing network so they get early awareness of information, whether cyber or not, building those relationships with our interagency partners like the FBI on the ground. We expect that we will continue to surge these resources through the 2024 election. And as the threat environment shifts, so will we. If you had asked me in the late 2019 what 2020 would have looked like, I would have talked a lot about cyber. I wouldn't have talked about dealing with the challenges of conducting an election during a pandemic and how to build security and resilience in that event. But we did a lot of work in the summer of 2020 helping election officials think about managing risk given changes in processes that they were putting into place because of the pandemic. And my goal, as I think about our election security efforts, is we need to be as agile and as dynamic today. We don't know what the threat environment may look like domestically in 6 months, and we need to be ready to respond to whatever it is.
You mentioned the disinformation side of things. Let's talk about that a little bit, because after 2020, the intelligence community issued a comprehensive assessment, essentially saying Russia and Iran were key players. Others like Venezuela or organized and attempted to conduct some influence operations, but that China considered but did not deploy influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the election. Do you expect that to be different in 2024 in the case of China?
I think time will tell exactly what China is willing to do associated with disinformation and influence of the election. But I think we have already seen an active Chinese disinformation campaigns targeting against the United States. As recently as the wildfires in Maui, Chinese disinformation campaigns were active, pinning the blame on U.S. weapons tests that were responsible for the fire. Obviously, that's complete nonsense, but I think it shows their willingness to try to exploit divisions inside the population. Rob mentioned that this morning, and I don't think we have seen any sign that China's efforts to try to exploit the United States and use disinformation as a tool against us will subside.
Have you specifically seen efforts from China targeting 2024? We've heard some things from Microsoft, especially talking about how China may aim to leverage AI to create more sophisticated looking disinformation materials.
I think it's a little too soon to talk about what we would expect to see in 2024. I mean, the most active influence campaigns targeting elections tend to be much closer to the elections itself. I mean, the major Iranian disinformation campaign in 2020 started in October of that year when they were masquerading as the Proud Boys and sending fake text messages out to American voters. We know that the disinformation associated with the election will kind of spike as the election gets a little bit closer. We'll probably start to see initial efforts from foreign nations even as part of primary season when that happens in the spring. But I think it's going to be telling. But we should expect that every country will follow the playbook that was set by Russia and expanded by Iran in every election moving forward.
Let me ask you about a matter now heading to the Supreme Court over a ruling that found government agencies coerced and threatened social media companies to take down content related to COVID and to the election in 2020. It's pending, but what can you say about the implications of government agencies being prevented from engaging with social media companies on the disinformation front?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that I'm going to be able to say about the pending litigation, but I would just point people towards the filing from the Solicitor General before the Supreme Court that goes into great detail about why the claims that the government was censoring or coercing social media companies was not accurate. CISA has been really clear that we never censored anyone and never pushed for any censorship, that the work we did was transparent and open. We testified about it openly before Congress, all the activities that we were doing. Many of them are public. Our CISA's rumor control website was available to everyone as a source of accurate information on how elections work. Because of the complexity of how elections happen inside the United States, it's a subject that's obviously rife for disinformation, very susceptible. And we think putting out accurate information is an important responsibility of the federal government, and we'll continue to do that.
We have 2 minutes and 40 seconds left. I'm going to ask you one question and then save 1 minute for an audience question. How big of a wild card is AI? I mean, it's a huge topic, but in all of what we've discussed, tell me how you're thinking about it in 1 minute.
Sure. I mean, I think AI, I think we are at the dawn of the AI age. And I think anyone who believes that they understand exactly how AI will develop, I think is probably selling you a bill of goods. Just as much as anyone who thought they could predict the entire internet age, 2 decades ago. What I can say is we expect that AI will continue to enhance adversary capabilities, maybe small at first and grow over time. And I think our challenge as a community is how do we harness all the benefits that AI can provide to advance our ability to defend ourselves, make our economy more efficient, advance U.S. security and economic prosperity while minimizing the potential risks that could be posed when adversaries exploit the same technology. Adversaries are going to have the same access to technology. Even today, open source AI tools will become increasingly available that they can use to make spear phishing more accurate. They can scale and improve the quality of disinformation campaigns. So it will be with us, but I do think it'll be slow for a while, and then we'll probably hit an inflection point, and you'll see dramatic and revolutionary enhancements of both the tools available, both the good guys and the bad.
And you think those conversations are going at the pace and with the alacrity that they need to be within the federal government and within Congress? I think it was Senator Cruz who said Congress doesn't know, quote, what the hell it's doing when it comes to AI regulation.
Yeah, I think that the one thing we can say for certain is that those conversations are happening with speed. I mean, the number of meetings that happen about AI policy and security right now, and it may feel a little bit like 5-year-old soccer where everyone is running to the ball at the same time. But I think that is a recognition that we recognize this is an important moment, that we do not want to waste the opportunity of the early days of the AI revolution to make sure we get ahead of the challenges, minimize those risks, and really try to get and extract as much positive benefit from these tools as possible.
We are technically out of time, but if there's a burning question in the audience, I want to allow it to be asked. No, it appears we have stunned everybody into silence. But thank you. Oh, is there one there? Oh, no, sorry. That was a head scratch. Thank you very much, Brandon, and thank you to the Cipher Brief for having us.
Thank you.